Just a few weeks ago, something unusual happened behind closed doors. The President of the United States quietly sent an envoy to Burkina Faso, not for a negotiation, not for a deal, but to apologize. The message? A formal regret over the controversial remarks made by General Michael Langley, the US AFRICOM Commander. His words had stirred deep frustration in West Africa, particularly among those fighting for sovereignty and dignity. President Ibrahim Traore didn't meet the envoy. He didn't need to. Burkina Faso's authorities made the country's position crystal clear. Cooperation with the United States will only continue if it's based on mutual respect and equal partnership. No more lectures. No more veiled threats. The era of unbalanced diplomacy is over. And then, just days later, another quiet but powerful move unfolded. President Trump officially replaced General Langley with Lieutenant General Dagvin R.M as the new head of AFRICOM. On the surface, it looked routine, just another leadership change in a distant military command. But for those paying attention, especially Pan-African thinkers and freedom advocates, it wasn't routine at all. It was a message. A subtle, calculated message wrapped in formality. But what exactly is that message? Why now? And what does it signal about the shifting balance of power between the West and Africa? Let's find out. On June 4, 2025, something quietly shifted in Washington. President Donald Trump nominated Air Force Lieutenant General Dagvin R.M. Anderson as the next commander of US Africa Command, AFRICOM. It didn't make headlines. There were no grand announcements, but behind that decision was the quiet closing of a chapter and the opening of another. General Michael Langley, the man Anderson is set to replace, made history back in 2022. He became the first black four-star general in the history of the U.S. Marine Corps and the first African American to lead AFRICOM. His appointment was seen by some as symbolic progress. But for many Africans, it wasn't the color of the commander that mattered, it was the mission. And AFRICOM's mission has always raised eyebrows. For those unfamiliar, AFRICOM is not just another military command. It's a powerful U.S. structure that reports directly to Washington. Its job? To oversee all American military operations on the African continent. From surveillance and drone bases to joint training and counterterrorism missions, AFRICOM is the unseen hand in many African affairs. And now, that hand is about to change. The question is, why? And what does this shift tell us about the future of US-Africa relations? According to US AFRICOM, its mission in Africa is clear: counterterrorism operations, strategic military training, and support for regional stability. That's the official story. Since its establishment in 2007, the presence of US military bases across the continent has steadily expanded, especially in countries grappling with security threats. But there's a disturbing irony here. Despite the growing footprint of American military operations, these regions haven't become more stable. In fact, they've become more dangerous. Even General Michael Langley, AFRICOM's own commander, acknowledged this troubling trend. He admitted that before AFRICOM was established, terrorism in Africa accounted for only 2% of global terrorist activity. Just 2%. That statistic alone should raise questions. Why, at a time when terrorism in Africa was so minimal, did the United States decide to launch an entire military command focused solely on the continent? It's a question that forces us to consider the uncomfortable possibility of ulterior motives. Because now, nearly 18 years later, the numbers are staggering. Africa's share of global terrorism has jumped to a shocking 45%. And according to Langley, the Sahel region, particularly Burkina Faso, has become the epicenter of this wave of violence. So if AFRICOM was created to fight terrorism, why did terrorism multiply after its arrival? Why has Africa gone from a marginal target to a global hotspot? These aren't just statistics, they're red flags. And they point to something deeper, something far more unsettling. We'll answer that question later. But for now, just sit with that truth. AFRICOM came to fight terror, and yet terror has only grown. Under General Langley's leadership, AFRICOM has come under renewed scrutiny, especially for its stance on the growing influence of the AES alliance. Publicly, Langley insists that AFRICOM's mission isn't about interfering with political transitions. According to him, it's purely about fighting terrorism, particularly in the increasingly volatile Sahel region. But behind that neutral posture, his recent remarks in a Senate hearing told a different story, one filled with warnings and quiet accusations. Langley pointed to a new and dangerous evolution of the terrorist threat: gold. He claimed that extremist groups are now financing their operations through the illicit gold trade. And at the center of that storm, he named one country, Burkina Faso. According to Langley, violent groups have seized control of key gold mines and trafficking routes in the country's northern regions. He stated that Burkina Faso has lost significant state control in those areas, allowing extremists to profit, expand their networks, and purchase more weapons. To him, the black market gold trade isn't just an economic issue, it's a security crisis, one that threatens regional stability, undermines legitimate governance, and presents a long-term threat not just to Africa, but to US strategic interests as well. But beneath his words, many in Africa saw something else: the subtle framing of Burkina Faso as unstable, ungovernable, and in need of foreign oversight. It was less a warning and more a message. Then came the comment that lit the fuse. During that same Senate hearing, General Langley accused Burkina Faso's military leadership of using the country's gold not to fight terrorism, but to secure their own protection. It was a bold statement, and for many Africans watching closely, it was a line crossed. The response was immediate and global. Across the continent, a wave of outrage erupted. But it didn't stop there. From black communities in America to Afro-descendant voices in Latin America, and even among European allies sympathetic to Africa's fight for sovereignty, Langley's words hit a nerve. They weren't just seen as disrespectful, they were seen as deeply hypocritical. How could a commander representing a foreign military occupation accuse a sovereign African leader of defending his own nation, while ignoring years of worsening instability under AFRICOM's watch? The backlash was swift. Langley and AFRICOM came under fire like never before. What was once considered a quiet, technical military presence had now become a symbol of mistrust, manipulation, and failed intervention. In response, Langley tried to walk it back. He claimed his remarks were taken out of context, distorted beyond his intent. But the damage was done. His credibility across much of Africa had collapsed, and so had the already fragile image of AFRICOM itself. That's why, when rumors began circulating that President Trump was planning to shut down AFRICOM as part of his America First strategy, the mood in many African circles shifted from outrage to hope. For the first time, it seemed possible that US military bases might actually disappear from African soil, that the era of quiet control and distant commanders might finally be coming to an end. And people weren't just watching, they were waiting. Just when it seemed like the dream of AFRICOM's exit was within reach, reality came crashing back. Despite earlier reports that Trump planned to shut down AFRICOM or merge it under the US European Command, his latest move tells a very different story. Instead of winding things down, Trump appointed a new commander to replace General Langley, Air Force Lieutenant General Dagvin R.M. Anderson. Anderson isn't just any officer. He currently serves at the Pentagon as the Director of Joint Force Development for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, a role that deals with long-term military strategy and global operations. For his new post, he's set to be promoted to the rank of 4-star general. That promotion is no small detail. Only independent combatant commanders hold that rank. If AFRICOM were being downgraded into a sub-command under EUCOM, Anderson wouldn't be getting a 4th star. He'd be reporting to someone else, another 4-star general already in charge of Europe. So what does this really mean? It means AFRICOM is staying exactly where it is, as a fully independent command, as the Pentagon's designated arm for Africa. All the talk about Trump scaling down foreign military presence, it doesn't apply here. The idea that the US was ready to pull its footprint from the continent has now been exposed for what it was: wishful thinking. And let's not forget who we're talking about. Trump has never pretended to care about Africa. His policies have consistently reflected that, from banning several African countries from entering the US to slashing aid programs that supported health, education, and infrastructure. So if this appointment isn't about protecting Africa or fighting terrorism, then what is it really about? That's the question we all need to ask. because the real reason lies beneath the surface, and it has nothing to do with peace. Lieutenant General Dagvin R.M. Anderson isn't just a career officer, he's a product of some of America's most elite military and academic institutions. He began his journey through the ROTC program at Washington University in St. Louis, graduating in 1992 with a degree in electrical engineering. A decade later, he earned a Master of International Public Policy from Johns Hopkins University's School of Advanced International Studies. He didn't stop there. Anderson further honed his understanding of international affairs at Harvard, the National Defense University, and Maxwell Air Force Base, building a profile that blends combat experience with geopolitical strategy. But it's his field record that truly sets the tone. Anderson is not a bureaucrat in uniform. He's a seasoned combat pilot who flew missions in the Middle East. More importantly, from 2019 to 2021, he led US Special Operations Command Africa, headquartered inside AFRICOM's base in Stuttgart, Germany. During that time, he oversaw special forces operations across the African continent, under the very same Trump administration that's now reappointing him to a more powerful role. So what does this all mean? Trump didn't choose Anderson to pack up and leave Africa. He chose him to double down. With a resume rooted in direct combat and elite special operations, Anderson was clearly selected to intensify and manage U.S. military strategy on the continent, not to scale it back. His appointment is a signal, loud and clear, that under Trump's renewed leadership, Africa remains a key theater for U.S. national security interests. The narrative of withdrawal is dead, and the next phase? It looks like escalation, not retreat. According to Africa Intelligence, the United States may be preparing a major policy shift in Africa, one that would re-establish security cooperation with the military juntas in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. These Sahel nations have made their position clear. They're done taking orders from the West. In recent years, they've pushed away traditional partners like the US and France and embraced new alliances with Russia, China, and other non-Western powers that offer support without conditions. But tensions have only grown deeper, especially after General Langley's remarks about President Ibrahim Traore. His comments weren't just offensive, they symbolized the wider problem. A problem of disrespect, of interference, of underestimating African sovereignty. For leaders like Traore, those words marked a point of no return. Under current US law, there's a clear restriction. The American military is prohibited from providing support to governments that came to power through coups. On paper, that should mean no cooperation with the AES alliance, whose leaders seized power through military transitions. But there's a loophole. The President of the United States can waive that restriction if he claims it's necessary for national security. And perhaps that's exactly what's happening now. Trump's decision to send an envoy to Burkina Faso to apologize for Langley's remarks wasn't just about damage control. It was strategic, a quiet step toward re-engagement, a signal that, despite the public fallout, the US isn't ready to walk away from the Sahel. It's trying to keep a foot in the door. Because if America loses its foothold in West Africa, it won't just be about diplomacy, it'll be about power, influence, and the global balance shifting further east. Now, it appears Trump is also prepared to carry forward a critical piece of the Biden administration's Africa strategy, relocating U.S. drone-based intelligence and reconnaissance operations to coastal West Africa. After being forced to abandon the Nigerian base at Agadez in 2024, the U.S. has been searching for new territory to host its surveillance infrastructure. The strategy is simple: shift operations to more stable coastal allies, countries like Nigeria, Ghana, or Ivory Coast. Initially, AFRICOM was rumored to be eyeing Ivory Coast, Benin, and Togo. But a new report released on June 8, 2025, revealed deeper insights. 4 current and former U.S. officials, speaking anonymously due to the sensitive nature of the issue, disclosed that efforts to relocate drone operations to Côte d'Ivoire and Benin had been abandoned. 2 of those former officials confirmed it outright. Those locations are off the table. But make no mistake, the larger plan hasn't been scrapped. The U.S. still intends to plant a massive military footprint somewhere along the West African coast. The strategy hasn't changed, only the map has. We got a clearer glimpse of that plan during the 2025 African Chiefs of Defense Conference held in Nairobi, Kenya. For the first time, AFRICOM extended invitations not just to Niger, but also to the defense chiefs of Mali and Burkina Faso, a major shift from last year when only Niger was welcomed due to its hosting of the largest US military base on the continent. This sudden expansion of invitations wasn't a gesture of goodwill, it was a response to crisis. It's a clear sign that the US is losing its grip on the region, that the power it once wielded so confidently in the Sahel is now slipping into the hands of new players and new alliances. Inviting Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger to the table wasn't about partnership. It was about survival, a last-ditch effort to reclaim relevance in a region that's moving on without them. During the opening session of the 2025 African Chiefs of Defense Conference, General Langley stepped up to the podium and delivered a message that should have sent shockwaves across the continent. "I want to emphasize US AFRICOM's strategic approach," he said. "I've been charged by Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth to mitigate threats to the US homeland posed by terrorist organizations, the most dangerous of which are, unfortunately, right here on the African continent." But then came the second point, one that pulled the curtain back even further. "My second charge from Secretary Hegseth," Langley continued, "is to confront the military ambitions of the Chinese Communist Party on the continent. AFRICOM's top priority is not to eliminate terrorism in Africa, but to prevent it from reaching US soil. That's their mission. They've said it openly, clearly, repeatedly, and yet somehow it continues to fall on deaf ears, especially among certain African leaders who still believe the US presence is about protection and partnership. It's not. Washington isn't losing sleep over the thousands of lives destroyed by extremist groups in Burkina Faso, Mali, or Niger. AFRICOM's job is not to stop terrorism from spreading across Africa, it's to keep it contained, to make sure it stays far away from American borders. This is not a partnership, it's containment. As we've said before, and must say again, the US doesn't care about stopping terrorism in Africa. It cares about keeping terrorism in Africa. So long as the chaos doesn't spill over into the United States, the mission is considered a success. And that's the bitter truth, one that Africa can no longer afford to ignore. The harsh truth is this: the United States will never help Africa eliminate terrorism, not because it can't, but because it won't. The US possesses the intelligence, the firepower, the technology, and the global reach to dismantle terrorist networks across the Sahel. But that's not the mission, because behind closed doors, terrorism and insecurity have become profitable business models. Insecurity justifies presence. Terror justifies spending. It allows the US to showcase its military might across Africa while propping up a billion-dollar arms industry. Every bullet, every drone, every piece of military equipment sold to fight African conflicts pours money back into US defense contractors. So why would anyone eliminate the very chaos that fuels their business? And this brings us to the second, and perhaps even more revealing point made by General Langley. "My second charge," he said, "is to confront the military ambitions of the Chinese Communist Party on the continent." Let's break that down. AFRICOM isn't just about terrorism, it's about geopolitical control. Langley made it clear, AFRICOM exists to stop China, and by extension, Russia. The goal isn't African peace, it's to block rivals from gaining influence on African soil. But here's the problem. Africa isn't a chessboard. It's not a battleground for foreign powers to measure their dominance. Langley's statement was more than arrogant. It was a direct assault on African sovereignty. How can the US claim to respect Africa while declaring openly that it will use its military to stop other nations from cooperating with African governments? What if African countries choose to invite China's military? What if they see Russia as a better partner? Where is the consultation? Where is the mutual respect? The US speaks of democracy and freedom, yet insists on choosing who Africa can and cannot work with. It's not cooperation, it's control, dressed in diplomatic language, but rooted in imperial thinking. And if Africa doesn't push back now, this pattern of quiet occupation will only deepen. It's astonishing how openly the US reveals its mindset, yet somehow few seem to question it. But maybe we shouldn't be surprised. This is the nature of US hegemony, dominance disguised as diplomacy, interest disguised as partnership. And if African leaders were truly awake to the game being played, they'd begin severing ties with Washington. Because at this point, it's clear, the United States does not have Africa's best interests at heart. General Langley continued his speech by listing what he described as the growing threats facing Africa and the world. He pointed to the Sahel region as the epicenter of terrorism, saying that Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are now in daily crisis. According to him, extremist groups affiliated with ISIS and Al-Qaeda are not only surviving, they're thriving. And in Burkina Faso specifically, he claimed the government has lost control of large portions of its own territory. Langley didn't stop there. He warned that attacks are on the rise again in the Lake Chad Basin, and that extremist networks are becoming more aggressive. But then came the most telling part. He said terrorists are now focused on gaining access to the West African coastline. Why? Because the coast offers a new lifeline, opportunities to finance operations through smuggling, human trafficking, and arms trading. And here's the part that proves everything we've been saying all along. According to Langley, if terrorists secure the coastline, it's not just African nations that are in danger. It also raises the risk of those threats reaching American shores. There it is, out in the open. AFRICOM's true mission isn't about ending terrorism in Africa. It's about containing it, keeping it boxed in, far from US borders, preventing the flames from ever reaching American soil, even if it means letting Africa burn. That's not partnership, that's self-preservation, and it's time Africa recognized the difference. On the sidelines of the conference, General Langley made yet another chilling statement. Extremist groups are gaining ground and also expanding their ambitions, he said. Therein lies the threat to the homeland, as they gain in capability and capacity. And then, almost casually, he added, AFRICOM is keeping a good eye on this. Let that sink in. He didn't say AFRICOM is stopping the threat. He didn't say they're confronting it head on. He said they're watching. Just watching, as terrorists overrun villages, slaughter innocent men, women, and children, and destroy the lives of countless families across the Sahel. Just watching, as African soldiers are ambushed and outgunned in a fight they never truly had the backing to win. Just watching, as homes, schools, and entire communities are wiped out. Where is the humanity in that? This, from the same people who preach human rights, who parade as defenders of democracy, justice, and equality. Yet in Africa, those values vanish. What remains is cold calculation and blatant hypocrisy. And what exactly is the purpose of more than 20 US military bases spread across the continent if their role is simply to observe, to act as silent guardians, not of African lives, but of Western interests? What's the point of signing all these so-called defense agreements when the actual defense never shows up? The truth is, these bases aren't here to help. They're here to contain, to monitor, to make sure the chaos doesn't spill into Europe or cross the Atlantic. And that's precisely why Niger made the bold move to kick them out. Because the people are waking up. They're beginning to understand that US military presence doesn't equal protection. It equals surveillance. It equals silence in the face of suffering. And more than that, it equals a quiet betrayal dressed in diplomacy. When asked specifically about Burkina Faso, General Langley tried to strike a diplomatic tone. The US seeks opportunities to collaborate with Burkina Faso on counterterrorism challenges, he said. He noted that he had invited the country's chief of defense to the African Chiefs of Defense Conference because, in his words, the dialogue must remain open. But his message was careful, strategic. He didn't speak of partnership as equals. He spoke of an invitation, of maintaining access, of ensuring the door isn't fully closed. Speaking to reporters before the conference began, Langley went further. We need to stay engaged with these countries, he said, referring to Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. We know they've taken on other partners, and that's okay. But beneath that carefully chosen phrase was the real message. The US doesn't intend to step back. Instead, they're exploring more nuanced ways to stay involved, through information sharing, intelligence gathering, and building what they call institutional capacity. But perhaps the most revealing moment came when Langley shifted from talking about terror to talking about trade. "We're taking a different approach," he said, "one that links security with trade." According to him, AFRICOM isn't just building military capacity, it's building an environment where American private sector investment can thrive. And then he said it clearly: there is no economic development without safety, and safe environments encourage private sector investment. This wasn't just a military briefing, it was a business strategy. Though he didn't go into specifics, his words echoed quietly over a much larger plan. A plan that reportedly involves deals between the US, Rwanda, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, aimed at ending the conflict in eastern Congo and opening the floodgates for American companies to invest in critical minerals like cobalt, copper, lithium, and coltan. Minerals that just happen to be dominated, at the moment, by Chinese companies. So now, it all becomes clear. President Trump's decision to keep AFRICOM in Africa has nothing to do with saving lives. It's about securing resources. It's about containing terrorism, not eliminating it. And it's about pushing back against China's economic and military influence in Africa by any means necessary. The question now is, what will Africa do? Will African nations sit back, once again, as global powers play chess over their lands, their people, and their resources? Or will this be the moment they rise, stand together, and finally take control of their future? Let us know what you think in the comment section below. Don't forget to like this video, drop your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives like this. Africa is watching, the world is watching, and history is being written right now.